If this was just another run-of-the-mill production remake of Sports Car by Tate McRae, where the main goal of the video is to make something that sounds as close as possible to the original, then the final product would have sounded something like this. But on this channel, we're doing things a bit different. So I'm going to recreate the groove, the sound design, and the general vibe of sports car track, but I will be reapplying it to work with the a cappella from my original song, Summertime.
Summertime, crazy nights, you and I have feeling. Electric lights from your heart to mine, electrifying feeling.
You can stream the song or watch the full music video. Links will be down below. But for now, I hope you can see how different those two songs are. Different tempos, different keys, different harmonic rhythms, and different genres, obviously. So that makes them perfect for showing you how you can take a groove from a hit song and apply it to work on your material. Of course, for educational purposes only. But before we move on, we need to define the rules of engagement. In other words, we're going to stay in the original sports car BPM, meaning 107, but I will be transposing or tuning drums, synth, whatever sound design I'll make to fit the harmonic rhythm of Summertime song. Simply put, the chord progression of Summertime song will be our main goal for this recreation. So without further ado, let's start with the drums. The drums in the sports car are everything. They have this Y2K character and punch. So to recreate it, we need to basically think about three things. Who is playing, when they're playing, and what is their character? So who is playing basically means we need to narrow down the scope of our search. There are myriads of kick samples and snare samples, but we need a specific kick, a specific snare, and so on and so forth. So I know that I'll be needing a stomp kick, a highly pitched snare, low percussion element, some dark but big sounding toms, dark open hi-hat, and even darker close hi-hat with like short and metallic tone to it. This is our starting palette. Next is when they're playing. This is timing. And I know that Y2K drums tend to be overcomplicated if you listen to them like for the first time. But when you nail down the kick and the snare and use it as a framework to figure out everything in between, it gets easier. I tend to leave the hi-hat patterns and everything that is top loop related to the last, because this is how it speeds up my flow. But you do you. This is how the hi-hats, I think, sound in sports car. Don't freak out if you can't find the perfect sample from the get-go, like in first 5 to 15 minutes of your search, or like in 20 minutes. Get the groove going like 75% there, and use something as a placeholder for the samples you cannot find. Like in this example, I'm using a clap as a placeholder for the snare. We'll come back to it later. But for now, I know that it plays all the right notes in all the right places. But it sounds too sterile, too pristine, like all buttoned up student. What I want is for these drums to sound bolder, darker, and looser at the same time. I want to add more grit and like darker vibe to it. So how can I get there? I ask myself. And the obvious answer is by layering a lot of low percussion elements underneath. So here are some samples from Kashmir Library, completely unintended. I've dragged in more than I actually ended up using, but it's good to have options, right? So I'm mimicking the entirety of the groove except for the drum roll. This one I like as it is, and I don't want to change it or affect it in any kind of way. For the post-processing, I'm using a touch of expansion to make them more lively. This is a layer after all. A bit of high shelf because we're aiming for dark and broody, not happy and cheering. Then goes double lock. This is a saturation plugin, and with all the juicy character that saturation tends to bring, it brings up a lot of low end mud, which I don't need. So I'm using a filter freak to clean that up. Next goes the Slate Digital Transient Shaper to control the tails of the samples if I need it to be controlled. And then goes Ozone Imager to help me get it out of the way of the main drums layer. Next step is to blend it to taste. Now, stay tuned till the end of this video to learn how you can take this situation a step further and add more groove and punch to your drums. But for now, let's zoom in on the snare. So I know I need to figure out how to layer the snare and make it punchy and fine-tune it. So I'm using a short snappy snare and I'm layering it with a highly pitched snare. This one is pitched to the E because Summertime Song is in key of E. The example in the beginning you've heard was tuned to the key of D because Sports Car is in the D, right? Listen to this. A high-pitched layer and a rim shot for like the hit. It's almost done. We can leave it as that, but I'm going to add another brighter snare and another pre-shifted clap with hefty amount of offset on certain hits to add a bit of variation. This is like a touch of that hit song quality to your drums when you add like subtle variation that you don't pick up on from the get-go, but it adds like extra oomph to your drums and the big pictures. The PLUCKS. When I listen to the Sports Car track, what I hear is that PLUCKS remind me of something glassy and mellow. Like imagine a wine glass that you're tapping with your manicured nail or like fine silver spoon. So we're looking for, well, like basically a glassy sound. And the obvious choice to recreate it would be a triangle wave. Like you get the triangle wave, a bit of dimension, a bit of reverb, saturation, and you're basically done. But I got a much better result with a saw rounded to square wavetable with wavetable position tied to a short envelope that controls this and the filter as well. For the post-processing, I'm using a filter freak on the envelope mode to further shape the sound. Then goes the decapitator to help it like stand up in the mix. Then I follow it with a transient shaper by kilohertz this time and a touch of plate reverb followed by an SSL reverb on the drum plate setting. The next iteration of that same pattern is performed by, probably you can get away with the same pluck, only an octave higher. For this, I'm setting the filter freak with more gentler settings, and I'm exchanging the 2-plate reverbs with a single Valhalla one on the whole mode for like different vibe. How can we, how can we take this repetitive pattern and apply it to our own material? The answer is know your harmony. So step 1, know your key and your chord progression. Step number 2, transpose the set pattern onto your key. Step number 3, find the notes that work with your a cappella and the ones that don't work with your a cappella. Step number 4, exchange the notes that don't work with the a cappella to the ones that do. A tip where to find those notes is to look at the notes that are used in your song's chord progression. 99% these are the ones that will be perfect. But if they don't, look for the extensions of these set chords. My dear viewers, I need your assistance. Please give that video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. And of course, share this video on your social media. This way, you will help me grow my audience. Thank you. I think that in the sports car, there are actually 3 basses playing. The obvious 808 that gives us the solid subs, the high bass that sits on top that is gritty and scratchy, and the mysterious third bass that you're going to learn about if you stay till the end of the video. But for now, let's deal with the top gritty bass. Some say it's a Hoover Bass. Others argue this is a Reese Bass. Well, when I'm listening to the song, the top bass reminds me of car engine revving up. You know, when you put your foot on the gas pedal and it goes like vroom, vroom. This is the sound I'm hearing, and that tells me that we are looking for a sound that is mid-range heavy, that points me into the direction of the Hoover Bass. Well, in my library, I found a Hoover Bass C, kind of a preset that uses 2 oscillators instead of classical 3. It's a Juno wavetable with 2 voices of unison that are slightly detuned, and a triangle wave and a sub that is set to play an octave lower. But the main kick of the sound is not the distortion or chorus that are present in the effects section, but inside the global tap. Look, here we have the unison set to 0. Without that setting, the bass, the whole patch won't work as it should. Now let's move on to the, even though we are like, if you listen to it, let's address the MIDI. So as you can see, the sports car and summertime have different harmonic rhythms, not to mention different chords. So how can we translate this bass onto that chord progression? So we'll be preserving the rhythm from the sports car, but the actual notes will be following the chord progression of summertime. For the post-processing, I'm using a shaper box, sidechaining to the kick, followed by distortion units, Devil Lock and Decapitator. Both units were dialed manually. I was listening which setting, when I was turning the knobs, will give me more of that mid-range roar and less of sandpapery screechy highs. Then I'm using a micro shift for the width, followed by CEQ, which in this setting, like, it's a crazy one, but it gives me the solid foundation inside the mids and really gives that roar a deep tone. And I really don't care that on the GUI it says that I'm cranking the lows portion of the sound. I guess I'm more trusting my ears than what actual GUI is saying. So now here's the common question, like common problem in the mix. How can you get that wide sound cut through the mix and not sound weak or thin when you have drums like we've got, solid, punchy, and with a lot of character. Probably most of you are telling me to open the filter inside the Serum and be done with it. But in case of this patch, whenever you open up the Serum filter, it starts to sound weak and abrasive, and we don't want that. What we need to do is to help this bass cut through the mix. In other words, add more harmonics. So what I'm doing is I'm adding another instance of Shaperbox with a drive module and filter module. What Shaperbox lets you do is apply effects based on frequency bands, and I'm applying these two only to the mid-band frequency. I drew distortion manually so it follows the bass pattern, and it gives me another like 1 tiny % of dynamics to my bass, and the filter module is set to 2 kHz to like gently refine the tone. For now, let's leave it for now at that and return to the 808 bass. With this one, I got lucky. I got very lucky because I stumbled on a perfect sample, and when you happen to stumble on a perfect sample, you don't need to overproduce it or put some plugins on it just because everyone does it. It sounds perfect, I like it, so I just put it inside the project and didn't do anything to it. But I still need to find like the place for both of them inside the mix. That is why I'm using Pro MB on the Hoover Bass to gently like duck the low end portion whenever the 808 bass hits. Also, I have an EQ on the Hoover Bass, which I neglected to mention. This one helps me to befriend the vocals and the Hoover Bass, hence the cut around 1.2 kHz. And this little dynamic boost around 300 Hz helps me to preserve the weight of the bass sound. Well, my CPU was killing me, so I had to like print the Hoover Bass, and as a final thought, I decided to add a mid-side EQ with just slight boost on the side channel. And also I have 3 parallel processes. 2 of them are targeting width in one way or another, and the third one is like gentle reverb. And that's it. That's our bass. For the Vox Synth, I highly suspect that in the original production, they used a sample of her own vocals to do it, so I decided to follow the same footsteps. I took a small portion of my own voice from the acapella directly, put it into Quick Sampler, cut the lows, boosted the highs, turned it in a pluck, added a bunch of reverbs, and basically I'm done. I'm also sidechaining this one to the snare instead of kick. When you're trying to recreate a sound and you have no idea how it's been made, the best course of action, in my opinion, is to listen to it carefully and put down whatever words pop into your head. You don't need to be scientifically precise or technically correct. Just put down whatever silly words pop into your head. So when I'm listening to the intro of Sports Car, what I'm hearing is high-pitched, whiny sound that is fat, not thin. It's wide, but it doesn't have a click at the beginning, though it has pitch fluctuation. And it has a lot of reverb. That's it. So let's work with what we've got. Let's start with high-pitched, whiny sounds. Probably we can work with sawtooth wave. So let's do that. Fat and wide can refer to unisons. So let's crank them up. When it comes to fat It can also mean that the sound is using more than one octave. So let's turn on the oscillator B and put it to play an octave lower. For the pitch fluctuation, I'm using an LFO to control slight pitch movement over the course of 4 bars, but I'm also using a pitch band, you can see the automation here, to create a drastic pitch jumps roughly at the beginning of each bar. Distortion is also a source of fatness to the sound, but I'm following it with a filter to control the screechy highs. And of course the reverb. For the bass processing, I'm using a shaper box for the pumping effect, like 4 on the floor. There is a spread plugin, it's native to Logic. This one helps me spread the high portion of the sound even wider, and then is a compressor sidechaining to the kick, and Pro Q here does nothing because it's for monitoring purposes only. If producers of the song called it a day and said it like we're done, that would have been 4 boring bars of intro, but instead they're adding another layer underneath it. After first 2 bars, we have another layer that plays identical part only an octave lower. And you can probably get away with the same patch, but I decided to exchange the sawtooth wave for another sawtooth wave figures. Instead of distortion and the effects, I'm using the distortion inside the filter. I'm cranking it up around like 8ish o'clock along with the fat knob. Everything else stays the same, but the post processing is a bit different. Still using the shaper box for the pumping effect, but I'm following it up with hand movement. Since this one is a layer, we can get more creative. And next goes the direction mixer. This is also a native Logic plugin, and it has 2 different modes. What it does, it spreads the sound across stereo field, but in 2 different modes, as I've said. If you want your layer to loom behind the lead, use the MS mode. And if you want your layer to gently hug the lead, but still be like visible on the stage in the mix, then use the LR mode. I'm using in this instance the LR mode, you've guessed it. Then compressor, sidechaining to the kick, and Pro Q here does nothing. But that's not the end of it. They have another layer underneath it all. There is a simple sine wave blip that plays an A note repeatedly, like every quarter note. It's really simple but effective, and in music, this technique is called pedal. It builds tension. To recreate that sound, we need a sine wave, a short envelope, crank up the unison to 3, filter to MG18, dimension to 50, reverb followed by a compressor, and that's it. For the post processing, I'm adding like a tiny bit of 16th delay, compressor, sidechaining to kick, and we're done. So how do we integrate this huge lead company into the summertime song? For this, I decided to use one of the riffs from the original song. I pulled the MIDI out, and it's kind of has similar 1-note contour as the original intro MIDI from Sports Car, so I think it will work. I applied this MIDI only to the lead and the layer of the lead, but the blip sound is playing the B note because we are in the key. The summertime is in the key of E. Ear candies. So the choir shouts are just a bunch of samples and cuts from the loops I found in my library. I stuck them all together, tuned them to fit the chord progression of Summertime, and was done with it. As to the bass hums, these ones are courtesy of Exhale. I had to make a preset manually because none of the available presets were doing what they needed to be doing. So I printed it out, cut it to fit like the bass notes precisely, and that's all. As for the car sound, I found a quite long recording of a car engine accelerating and starting up and accelerating again. So this one was just a matter of cutting up the right portion of the sample and putting it in the right place. The mysterious third bass. Well, this one happens at the end of the chorus section only, and some of you might argue that it belongs more to ear candy section of this video than bass section, but I personally believe this one is a bass because it's a super saw with a square in the saw oscillator. What's a super saw bass? Super saw is when you take a sawtooth wavetable, crank up the unison into the stratosphere, and apply a high and aggressive filter like 24 dBs per octave. And then you will obviously have to follow it up with another filter inside the effects section because boy, they are scratchy. But the main grit and power of the sound comes from, you probably guessed it by now, Devlock and Decapitator. And that's it. The promised extra drum oomph. Remember when we were layering the main drums layer with the low percussion layer? We were setting it up to taste at the fixed level. What if we automate that level to make certain hits hit harder and others hit softer? Listen to this. I hope you noticed the difference. And the beauty of this approach is that you can get as creative and as intricate with the automation as you want. Now, let's listen to the whole thing and tell me in the comments, have I nailed the sports car vibe or not?